But in the end, did it really matter? Dead without a soul or dead with it, he would still be just that, dead. No Hope or Bob Hope. And Bob Hope's dead. Well, at least this bunch had guns, and whatever their reasons for protecting him, they were all he had left. The God Squad. It was embarrassing, really. Larry fixed the priest with a firm, steady gaze. Okay, Padre. But I draw the fucking line at prayer meetings. Nichols beamed. Me too, terribly boring things. You're making the right decision, Larry. We will do everything in our power to help you, even if it means our lives. That's a promise. He held out his hand. All of you? Larry asked. All of us. Even Lewis? Ha! Yes, Larry, even Lewis. If there was one thing Larry McCulloch knew, it was how to tell a liar. And this guy may be many things, a religious nut for one, but he was telling the stone-cold truth. Even that clown Lewis would die for him. That alone was worth sticking around to see. Larry took the priest's hand and shook it firmly. Deal. So what happens now? Larry asked. We wait. Nichols replied, then got to his feet and called through into the next room. Anya, Lewis, Jeff, can you all come in here, please? Larry stood as the three of them entered the room. Larry has agreed to let us help him. Much to Larry's surprise, all three, even Lewis, looked genuinely pleased at the news. Of all the things that had happened today, thought Larry, that was definitely the most surreal. Peroni stepped forwards and took Larry's hand in both of hers and shook it vigorously. Larry, that's great news. The kid Jeff was next to shake his hand. We won't let you down, Larry. Larry looked across at Lewis, who was looking down at his feet, and thought, if he hugs me, devil or no devil, I'm out of here. But Lewis just looked up and gave half a smile and a nod. Guess you're brighter than I thought, Larry, he said, but made no move to shake his hand or, thank Christ, hug him. It was refreshingly honest and the closest he would ever come to liking the little shit. Splendid, Nichols said with a clap of the hands. Now, let's get some fresh tea. It's about time I gave you all a crash course in what I know about our friend Randall and his little playmates. Charlie Walker stood at the window of his father's private hospital room and looked through at the fragile old man sleeping inside. Even though it had been 5 days since his last visit, Charlie's first reaction upon seeing his father asleep was to turn around and leave. He'd done it before, last week, telling himself it was best to let the old man sleep, to preserve his strength. But the truth was, he hated coming to this place and seeing him like this, so weak, so vulnerable. The truth was, Charlie Walker was a coward, and he knew that when his father was finally gone, he would deeply regret times like these, no matter how many times he told himself it was for his father's own good. Charles Walker Sr. had been a huge bear of a man, and although Charlie himself had never seen any evidence of it, had a reputation as a hard man. He was the polar opposite to Harry Lynn, the muscle to Lynn's brains, and that was why they had made such a good team in the old days. But that was before the cancer had kicked the shit out of him. Now even Charlie, skinny bugger that he was, could pick up his old man without so much as a grunt of effort. It had all happened so fast. It seemed like only yesterday that his dad was still at the heart of things. Even though Lynn had forced him to retire, he just couldn't keep away from the clubs, so much so that as Charlie had moved up in the business, he had to keep one step ahead of him, just in case he bumped into his dad, while on a job for Uncle Harry, which would have resulted in his immediate painful death. Because Charles Walker Sr. had never wanted that life for his children, and everyone knew it. But just 6 short months later, he was a shadow of his former self, just a bag of bones now. Charlie's dad was only 65, but he looked 20 years older. Seeing him laid there with his breathing so shallow you could hardly make out the rise and fall of his chest. Deep down, Charlie wished the old man could just slip away, to be with his mother, who had died, again of cancer, when he and his sister were just 12. The old man stirred and opened his eyes. He smiled weakly, seeing his son standing outside, and motioned for him to come in. Charlie opened the door and was immediately hit by a wave of stifling heat. Christ, he exclaimed. Warm enough for you, Pops? Come in, mate. How long have you been lurking around out there? Charlie picked up a chair and put it down by his father's bed and took a seat. Didn't want to wake you. Dad, it's boiling in here. You want to get them to turn the heating down. His father struggled to sit up. Charlie moved to help him, but he shooed him away with a wave of his hand. This is how I like it, he said, trying to get comfy. Can't seem to get warm these days. Guess I don't have as much meat on me as I used to, eh? He winced at the effort of sitting up, which made Charlie cringe. He desperately wanted to help him, but knew he wouldn't be thanked for it. Finally, he seemed to get comfortable. Can't stay too long, Dad, Charlie lied. Just popped in to make sure you're all right. Oh, I'm all right, he gestured to a plastic jug on the bedside table. Pour us a glass of water, would you, Charlie? So they're keeping you busy at work then, huh? He poured him a glass and handed it over. Eh? Oh, yeah, Charlie replied. Suppose those houses won't sell themselves. Charlie's heart sank. The old lie raising its ugly head again. Even though he was knee-deep in the business and slowly moving up the food chain there, his dad still believed he was an estate agent. Charlie suddenly had the urge to tell his father everything, just blurt it all out and damn the consequences. But checked himself as he always did, he knew this wasn't the right time, it never was these days. When he's better, he told himself. He'd been saying that for 6 months now. So simply answered. Yeah, something like that. His father sipped the water. Ah, that's better. Could do with a pint though, and winked at him. Yeah. So what did the doctors say? Do they think you'll need another op or not? Charlie asked. His father shrugged. Christ knows. They've done a load more tests, taken more blood. I'm surprised I've got any left, can't think what they do with it all. I think they sell it, Charlie said, trying to keep his voice as light as he could. Huh, his father grunted. Don't think they'll get much for mine. He studied Charlie for a moment, the way he always used to. Although his body had betrayed him of late, Charlie could see he still had those same piercing green eyes, thankfully still so full of life. The thought lifted his spirits a little. You look a little tired, Charlie, are you eating all right? His dad said after a moment. This made Charlie smile. Yep, his old dad was in there somewhere. Dad, I'm 21. He replied. I can look after myself. Besides, you should be concentrating on getting yourself fit and not worrying about me. His father nodded and seemed to drift off, lost in thought, and his expression turned solemn. There was a long pause until Charlie finally said. Dad, you all right? Look, his father said a little awkwardly. Charlie, I know you're busy. He glanced around the room as if looking for inspiration. It's just that. I really need to talk to you, properly, I mean. Charlie leant on the bed. He thought about taking his father's hand, but dismissed the idea. Course, I've got time, Dad, as much as you need. He seemed relieved to hear it. Good lad. I've already spoken to your sister. I know I'm being silly, but I just wanted to tell you. He exhaled, frustrated at his lack of articulation. For Christ's sake, I'm useless at this type of thing. Your mother was always the emotional one, God rest her soul. He always said that, Charlie remembered, whenever he mentioned his mother. God rest her soul. Even though he wasn't even remotely religious. She had been the churchgoer. Always praying for his dad's soul. After all, he needs all the help he can get. She would joke. Seeing his father's discomfort, Charlie took hold of his hand without realizing it. It was only when his father squeezed it tightly that he noticed he'd done it. Dad, what's wrong? Charlie felt a sudden rush of emotion. It had crept up on him and he had to fight it back, otherwise he knew he would lose it altogether. Charlie got to his feet and his father released the grip he had on his hand. Charlie hadn't done it to pull away from his father, just break the spell, and thankfully it had the desired effect. The old man smiled knowingly. He knew, like Charlie, they were both as bad as each other. Northern males, they'd rather fight than hug. Sit down, mate, he said to Charlie, nodding towards the chair, and Charlie sat back down. Look, all I wanted to say is just how proud I am of you. You and your sister. It can't have been easy with me either, away or banged up in prison when you were growing up. I always worried, so did your mother, God rest her soul, about how you would both turn out. Charlie watched as he took another long drink of water. I tried my best to be a good dad, but it was the life I was born into, I didn't know anything else. It sounds lame, saying it out loud, and I'm not trying to make excuses for all the times I wasn't around. Hey, come on. Charlie cut him off, you were a great dad. We never wanted for anything. I know you've done stuff, in the past, but we still knew right from wrong. And let's just say your friends were more colorful than the other kids' parents, that's all. Tell you what, thought, we were never picked on at school, that's for sure. His father grinned. It was the first time in weeks he'd seen that old mischievous smile, and it looked good on him. Don't get me wrong, he father said. Harry Lynn's been good to me down the years, always looked after your mom and you kids when I was inside, and you too after she passed. And like I said, I make no excuses for the path in life I took. It's just. Charlie suddenly felt sick. He knew exactly what he was going to say. It's just, he continued. I always wanted better for you and Kate. And seeing how well you're both doing. Kate, about to finish her degree soon. And you? Never thought you'd end up as an estate agent. Charlie had to look away. That particular running gag with the lads now made him feel utterly ashamed. Even though the room was boiling hot, he felt suddenly cold. "Dad, listen," his voice cracked with emotion. He could feel his bottom lip trembling uncontrollably, like he was some kid about to confess to shoplifting or something equally as lame. "Charlie," his father squeezed his forearm. "Charlie, look at me, son." Charlie gritted his teeth and looked back into his father's face. He was crying, and Charlie had never ever seen him cry before, not even when his mother had died. He felt as if the air had been sucked right out of his lungs. "You have no idea how proud I am of you," his father said softly. "You and Kate, and I know she never got to tell you herself, but I know how proud your mum would have been too. God rest her soul. She never got the chance, so I just had to before." Charlie Fair leapt up and, leaning over the bed, hugged his father tightly, which surprised them both. His eyes welled, then he just let the tears come. "We always knew, Dad. Now come on, enough of this bollocks, you'll be up and about in no time, making everyone's life a misery again." His father gently patted him on the back and after a long moment gently pushed Charlie away so he could take a good look at him. He smiled warmly, more warmly than Charlie could ever remember him doing before, and it felt good to see it. "Yeah, I know. But I'm glad I got to say it." A look of mischief flashed behind his eyes. "Mind you, tell any other bugger about this, and you'd better pray I don't get out of here." It was just a joke, but it made Charlie's heart skip just the same. "Now come on, give us a kiss, you big girls, blouse, and bugger off so I can get some rest." Charlie laughed and got to his feet, shaking his head in mock disbelief. "It's the 21st century, Dad. Men cry all the time now. I'm sure the boys at the club won't think any less of you when I tell them." His father raised his fist and shook it. Charlie nodded. He leant over and kissed him on the forehead, then turned to leave. As he reached the doorway, he paused for a second before leaving and turned to look at his father once more, who was wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "I love you, Dad." Then turned and walked off down the corridor. Halfway down, he heard his dad shout, "Gay!" which raised a smile. It was the first time he had ever told his father he loved him. It was the truth, and they both knew it, even if it had to end in some nonchalant comment. And Charlie Walker was damn glad he had finally said it. Bill Fraker watched as Charlie came walking out of the hospital entrance and jogged over to where he was parked. He felt a pang of sorrow for the kid. His dad was a good man, and it was a crying shame what had happened to him. But as he approached the car, Fraker had to admit Charlie looked a hell of a lot better coming out than he had going in. Charlie got in and Fraker pulled the car away. "So, how is the old bastard?" asked Fraker. Charlie nodded a little, and Fraker thought he saw the faint hint of a smile. "Yeah, good, well, you know." The smile, if it had even been there, faded. "He still thinks I'm a fucking estate agent. It's the best way, mate." "Nearly told him," said Charlie, staring out of the side window. "Well, bloody don't, Charlie. It's better all round," advised Fraker. "Yeah, suppose. So where to now?" Fraker had gotten the call while Charlie was inside. It was Action Stations. "The airport," he said. "The Yank has arrived."